Good morning, everyone. And I'd like to warmly welcome you to our fourth Talk.BD event. I'm Dr. Emma Morton, and this session today will be focused on strategies to manage substance use during the COVID-19 crisis. I'm very pleased to be hosting today on behalf of Crest.BD, and we're also very fortunate to have with us Victoria Maxwell and our guests from Spectrum over in the UK, Dr. Stephen Jones. So whether you're joining us from Canada, the UK, or beyond, welcome. I'll just quickly introduce myself first. Despite my Australian accent, I'm in fact joining you from mainland Vancouver. I'm a postdoctoral fellow with the University of British Columbia, studying digital health tools and quality of life for people with mood disorders. And I've been with the Crest.BD team since 2015. My hobbies are drawing and crafting, but since moving to Vancouver, actually 6 months ago now, I've been trying to get out more and enjoy the beautiful green spaces that you have on offer. And I'll just hand it over to Dr. Stephen Jones to introduce himself.
Great, thanks Emma. Hi, I'm Steve Jones. I'm a professor of clinical psychology at Lancaster University and co-director of the Spectrum Centre that focuses on supporting people with bipolar. In terms of where we're based, we're located in the northwest of England. And in terms of hobbies, I think I need to admit to playing guitar rather badly.
Okay. I think we might be able to start a Crest.BD band. There's a couple of people with hidden musical talents. Victoria?
I'm Victoria Maxwell, and I'm a peer researcher with Crest.BD. I've been with Crest from its inception, I guess probably at least 7 years ago. And then my full-time job is as a mental health speaker and a performer and a mental health coach. And I live with bipolar disorder and anxiety with psychotic features, and living fairly well, but still hitting those bumps when those bumps come. My hobbies, I'd say running is partially a hobby, but also a wellness tool. And I am an avid reader. I'm an avid slow reader, and I'm actually an avid slow runner too. So it's a bit of both. And if you do hear a bark in the background, that's my dog Pedro, who I go running with, but just to let you know who it is or what it is.
Yes, my dog promises he'll be very quiet also, fingers crossed. If you haven't been joining us for the previous sessions, or even if you have, I just want to say what this series is about. This is a special initiative that Crest.BD has put in place to support our community in what has been a very challenging time for many people. Crest.BD is a Canadian research network dedicated to advancing the study of quality of life, digital health tools, self-management, and stigma and creativity for people with bipolar disorder. But we know that during this time of COVID-19, these kinds of challenges are experienced by people with similar mental health conditions. We also have carers and healthcare providers who are interested in ways that they can provide support. So whatever brings you to this event, you're all warmly welcome. Our research approach is to make sure that we partner hand in hand with people with bipolar disorder to ensure that the research that we do is relevant to things that are important in your lives. And we also try to make sure that we share the results of that research to people who can benefit most from those findings. And we have a number of partner organisations around the world like Spectrum who also share that ethos. I'll briefly run through a few housekeeping points. We have people today joining us via Zoom or the Facebook live stream, and we're trying to take questions during this event. We've taken a few beforehand via the Crest.BD website, but if something pops to mind that you'd like to ask the team today, you can ask that via the Zoom Q&A box, or if you're on Facebook, you can post on the live stream, and Laura, who has already introduced herself in the chat, will be taking those questions. I'll relay those to the presenters later, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. So with those housekeeping notes done, I think I'll pass it over to Stephen.
Great, okay. Thanks for that, Emma. So I think for this initial sort of brief presentation, the first thing I wanted to highlight was obviously we're living, all of us, in uncertain times, and that all of us are experiencing sort of global challenges with issues around disrupted routine, uncertainty, isolation and boredom. And I think for many people, the initial onset of the pandemic was linked to strong feelings of panic and fear. And it's important to recognise that this is an ongoing situation for quite a lot of people. So we are in these uncertain times, definitely. And in terms of substance use, I think before we talk about substance use in relation to bipolar, it's worth considering substance use in the general population. So the first thing to acknowledge is that substance use is common. So if we think about, for instance, the UK, US and Canada, around 80% of people use alcohol and more than half do that regularly. If we think about cannabis, around 15% of people use that, and 5 to 10% regularly, something like that, with lower rates of some of the other substances. So in the general population, using alcohol is common. If you think about substances as a whole, most people in the general population have used something. And substance use in general, in moderation, can be fine. And I think that, you know, this sort of UK tradition of meeting at a pub at the end of the working week for a few drinks and a chat with friends is fine. And you can see the sort of social element, people trying to replicate that with things like virtual pubs on Zoom and that sort of thing. So I guess one of the questions is, when does it become a problem? And I think really substance use becomes an issue when it becomes habitual and when it becomes essentially the go-to solution for a wide range of day-to-day problems. And a number of things can sort of trigger that as a potential difficulty. And certainly major life crises and major external crises can actually be one of the issues which can contribute to that. So the current pandemic would definitely qualify as such a crisis. And if we look back at previous difficulties, for instance, the Hurricane Katrina would be a good example. There's plenty of research around showing increases in alcohol and substance use both during and after the immediate effects of Katrina had passed away. So why do people use substances? I think generally people use substances for lots of reasons, but they boil down to often being changing how you feel. And doing that in moderation, again, is absolutely fine. But when it's used in a problematic and habitual way, that can cause difficulties. Aside from the physical health difficulties, it can also be associated with the worsening of the feelings that people might have been trying to address in the first place. And the reason people can sort of fall into that pattern is perfectly understandable. So many substances have short-term immediate effects that seem to address an unpleasant mood, for instance, but they then have delayed effects over repeated use that can not only worsen that problem, but they can reduce access to more positive approaches because you can become fixed on using that particular solution. And in terms of bipolar disorder, I think there are particular challenges that people with bipolar experience. So living with bipolar includes often living with instability, with symptoms of depression or mania, with symptoms of anxiety or other associated difficulties. And also people with bipolar often have a stronger drive towards reward and higher levels than the general population sometimes of impulsiveness, which means resisting issues around substances can be more of a challenge potentially. And in terms of substances used, alcohol is again the most common substance used by people with bipolar, just like the general population. Cannabis is the second most widely used substance. So the pattern is very much similar across the general population and the subset of people within that who have bipolar. About 50 to 60% of people have report having had a problem with substances over their lifetime. And about a third of people with bipolar report that that has been a problem in the last year. And the sorts of problems people identify around substance use can be difficulties with day-to-day functioning, treatment outcomes not being as good, and additional difficulties with mood. And I think it's possibly worth mentioning that another issue is that sometimes those issues can be apparent even with relatively moderate use. So thinking about these issues is a worthwhile endeavor, I think, for people. And in terms of why people use substances in their bipolar, that many of the reasons are very similar to what we find in the general population. So people use substances to address distressing feelings or manage mood, to feel calm, to relax, to help sleep, and for some people just to feel good.
Yes, Stephen, I was just going to pop in here from my own experience. And I think also when we think of substances, typically we think of sort of alcohol and drugs, a variety of drugs. And for me, it was alcohol and food, though, originally. And I think it's like you said, I mean, granted, food in moderation is always good, but we can't become abstinent from food, which is one of the difficulties. But what I found also with alcohol, in terms of the reasons, that it almost seems like it's just slightly more exaggerated for people with bipolar disorder, that because I was also used to the highs, and if I was coming out of a low, it was a way for me to replicate artificially that kind of high with a lot more consequences. And I think that impulsivity as well influenced my decision-making around my alcohol use. And so I found before I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, my alcohol use was fairly, I would say it was moderate, but it would go into sort of heavy use at times. And that was also partially my age. There's sort of no binge drinking when you're in your 20s. But as I've aged, and as what I'm noticing is that my sensitivity to alcohol has increased. So before I would be able to, even maybe 5 years ago, and I'm 53 now, but 5 years ago I could have a drink with dinner, 4 times a week, and it wouldn't bother me. And now I'm really noticing that my system is much more sensitive to it. So I have to really find other ways to enjoy dinner without alcohol, which is obviously what a lot of people do who don't drink at all. So it's been a transition for me. And so I just wanted to mention those two things, is that food can also be a substance, because I was definitely using that as a way to alter how I felt, particularly with anxiety and depression. And with alcohol, noticing that the effects of alcohol the consequences of alcohol were more severe as I've aged with bipolar disorder.
That's great, Victoria. Thank you. And that really helpfully illustrates that issue of sort of patterns, including relatively moderate use at different stages, can have different effects.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I never had been drinking alcoholically. And I remember somebody asking, well, how do you know when it's a problem? And because there's kids, students, young people who are binge drinking or drinking a lot. And I think it's like you said, it's when it's habitual and where it really interferes with functioning. But ideally, you want to notice it even before it starts to interfere with functioning, because at that time, then it's usually already quite an ingrained issue. And it's easier to address if you address it earlier.
Perfect. So thank you for that, Victoria. And so in terms of thinking about the issue of what people might do about substance use, then I think there's a couple of elements to that. One is obviously for people who have an established problem, then maintaining engagement with current treatment and doing that through the remote mechanisms that have been put in place, certainly in the UK, and I understand internationally, is sort of priority one. But as Victoria was saying, identifying early issues of substance use potentially becoming problematic, recognition is really key. And I think going alongside that is self-compassion around that recognition. So if you're feeling that it might be problematic, being very judgmental of oneself around that is very likely to be counterproductive. Whereas actually identifying and accepting that this may be an issue, and the earlier the better, in line with what Victoria was saying, makes it easier to think of ways of addressing the sorts of issues you might be having.
Yeah, and Stephen, I wanted to also mention that idea of, because for people I know that use substances, or myself when I was using them, particularly with food, that self-compassion was really helpful, because I started to recognize that it was really about self-soothing. And now that there's more information and therapeutic sort of approach with using sort of a trauma-informed approach, recognizing that it can be a lot about past traumas, as well as, excuse me, bipolar disorder and attachment styles and things. So I think understanding that, it's sort of like the best solution that a person can find at the time with the resources that they have. And so I think it goes a long way, both for family members to have some understanding and some compassion, and also for that individual, because there can be so much shame around the sort of whole concept of substance use. And I think that's why ideally we're saying substance use as opposed to substance abuse.
Yeah, no, that's great. And I think that leads on to this issue of looking at, in a sense, so in using substances and in identifying it might be developing as a problem, what sort of problems or feelings or memories are you trying to address? And in identifying those, as Victoria was saying, with compassion for self, or if it's a relative, compassion for the relative, the other issue is how you then search for alternative positive ways to address that. And I think, a key thing there is that for most people, we need to reach out. We need to access support from the people around us, even though some of that support is more remote than it would normally be. And also accessing the appropriate sort of remote resources, both in terms of clinical services, but also the kind of information, for instance, that Crest provides. So Crest has developed some great resources on uncertainty and anxiety and family issues, which are all freely available. And I think Emma's going to walk us through some additional substance use specific information for people at the end of the Q&A. So I think it's not trying to do everything alone is really key.
Yeah, and I found that particularly true. For a number of years, I belonged to Overeaters Anonymous, and I think it's just like knowing that you're not alone with bipolar disorder or depression, and having sort of a shorthanded language so that people, you know exactly what it means to white knuckle it when you're really wanting to, binge or something, or where you're in the depths of darkness, and people understand that it's something that you can't just think your way out of. I think that peer support is really essential, as well as the professional help that maybe gives some psychoeducation and some tools. And that's been sort of my path, as well as the medication that allows sort of some stability. And what I found really interesting was that when I was struggling with, particularly for both food and alcohol, it wasn't until my bipolar disorder was actually identified that allowed me to get the right tools, because I was sort of looking in the wrong direction. I was trying to sort of control this behavior that I was doing. And it wasn't until, like you said, Stephen, that I started to actually find out that there was this whole other condition that was driving those behaviors, as well as some other issues, some personal issues and things. So when those were starting to be addressed, the substance use behavior started to decrease, almost not completely on their own, but with a lot less effort.
That's really helpful. Yes, that's sort of key link between the bipolar experiences and some of the other challenges, and what you need to change what is really key, I think. So that's really helpful. And I think another aspect to this is not just focusing on what you're wanting to not do, if that makes sense. So it can be really easy to get locked into, not engaging in problem eating or not using alcohol problematically. But I think it's at least as important, probably more so in some ways, to think what does actually fire your interest, what does matter to you, and what's of value. And to really try and focus your routines around including those sorts of things that actually matter, whatever it is, whether it's nature, arts, supporting others, and finding ways of actually engaging with that alongside doing these sensible things to sort of manage your substance use. And even though we are, in most countries, socially distancing and in lockdown, I think that, there has been an explosion of sort of digital resources that make a lot of these things much more possible remotely than they ever used to be.
Yeah.
And also, just standard sensible things like using exercise as a distraction as well as a mood boost, and having a side effect of helping keep yourself fitter, and just sort of building those things into a general routine.
Yeah, and the two things that come to mind when you say that is that particularly when I was sort of using these substances, oftentimes my mood wasn't that stable. So to find something that I really enjoyed or valued, it was sort of a distant memory. So it really was able to use it as a distraction until I started to actually it was sort of like the more that I engaged in it, slowly did that joy and that sense of value come back. So for me, it might have been, walking with friends, and I would still, come back home and feel completely depressed. But eventually, slowly, the more I was willing to socially connect, the more that I was able to distract myself from wanting to, do whatever problematic substance use behaviors. And it sort of merged, or I was able to merge onto a different route. And that became really helpful. And I think also when I did start to feel better and I was doing things that I valued, it mimicked some of the good feelings that I had that I missed when I would have hypomania or mania, and it would buoy me up from the depression or the anxiety. And it gave me a sense sort of mastery, or of sort of self-efficacy when I was doing that. So for me, it was creative writing a lot, and it still is. So I think those are really important points for people, and those are sort of practical things that you can do even though in these strange times, things that you might be able to do on your own, or let's say virtually with other people, or webinars like this.
And thank you for that. I think that really highlights very well this issue of that these things take time as well, that doing the right thing doesn't just solve a challenge overnight. And so this issue of compassion in terms of trying, failing sometimes, adapting what you're doing, then making more progress, and gradually, as you were saying, the sort of value of doing that becomes more apparent over time, I think.
Yeah, that's been my experience for sure.
And I think just finally, I mean, alongside all of that, if in a sense we're using substances to address feelings, uncertainty and worry about the current situation is likely to be part of that. And I think, just consciously noticing that this is a temporary situation, consciously noticing a few good things each day can also just be a useful small element in, as Victoria, you were saying, in terms of just helping your mood, if it's beginning to feel rather low, just another small thing to help your mood just sort of stay within help usual bounds.
Yeah, and it's something that was recently suggested to me because I was going through quite a really low period actually, and it was my therapist that said, and just cherish those small moments when you do feel that kind of, it might not even be close to joy, but it might be a reprieve from the really uncomfortable feelings. And that was something that really helped me sort of put things in perspective, and also made me feel like, oh, okay, I'm still alive. This is okay. I'm going to keep moving forward towards that North Star. It's just slow going. And it helped because it gave me also almost like a treasure hunt to do. And it gave me a different focus other than other things. And I think that can help also with substance use. If you're, like you said, trying, instead of trying not to do something, following what you want to do, and creating that and moving towards that.
Yes, I think that's really helpful, and I think those are the sort of key things I wanted to flag up. So is there anything further you wanted to
No, I think maybe some questions perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both for sharing those that information and those tips. And I'm really struck by, once again, how important it is for us to maintain self-compassion and creatively find ways to socially connect during this time. How important that's been across all of the different topics we've brought up, whether that's anxiety or substance use. So I'll turn. Thank you, everyone who has submitted a question. We're still taking them via Facebook and via the Zoom Q&A. So I'll do this one to start off. This person says, while I work in mental health and have bipolar type 1, I'm finding that I'm beginning to fall back into drinking every day ever since the COVID-19 pandemic began to deal with stress. I'm doing the opposite to what I'm telling people facing their mental illness. I feel somewhat guilty. Can you please offer a few tips what I should do and how I can disengage from thinking virtually every waking hour about my own illness? Thank you.
Okay, shall I dive in?
Yeah.
So, thanks for that question. I mean, I think we've talked a lot about compassion, and I think this is a great question for illustrating that. So from what you're saying, this person is actually working in mental health services and living with bipolar themselves, and is worried about their sort of alcohol use becoming sort of a daily feature. And I think being aware of that problem is actually the starting point. So I think, you know, the first thing is to congratulate that person on identifying that this might be a developing issue. And then if they're in mental health already, it might actually be very helpful to think, if this was one of your clients, what would you actually be advising them to do? Because it sounds as though from the question, the person might be being quite self-critical and thinking about, why am I doing this? I'm in mental health. I should be able to help myself because I can help other people. But, you know, speaking as a therapist, if we have problems, we're generally not brilliant at sorting them out on our own. We need support just like everyone else. So I think, you know, actually being confident to think it's okay as a therapist or a clinician to reach out for help as well. And that the online resources we're talking about can be things that are really useful in that context as well.
Yeah, and I don't have a lot to add to that, except that I think it does have a lot to do with self-compassion and that awareness. And I mean, I guess if you're looking at sort of a practical tip, is when you notice that you're wanting to have, you know, maybe one more drink than you'd like to, being able to just sit with that discomfort. And I read this one that it's uncomfortable but acceptable. So that feeling that you might have, and even if those guilty feelings come up, being able to just notice them as they happen. And then, you know, if you have that drink, you have that drink. But sometimes I find that compassion just before the urge to do a behavior that you might not want gives enough wiggle room to either make a different choice or for other feelings to come up that might be propelling that behavior. And and allowing yourself to not have any expectations of how your behavior might change. And I think that's it. And the other thing sometimes is like with the 12-step group, some reasons why it's so successful is because there's peers. And so being able to reach out to a trusted person and just, you know, if you're wanting to make a commitment around sort of finding a buddy that you feel like you can talk to and not necessarily have you change what you're doing, but just really care for you and accept you as you are. with what you're doing. And sometimes things start to shift on their own that way.
Thank you. That's a really good tip, particularly if you are finding it difficult to be compassionate to yourself, to find somebody you trust in your life who can be that compassionate for you.
Sure.
And spinning off what you said about finding peers, whether it's virtually or reconnecting with people who you used to meet up with online, we had a couple of questions come up about these kind of online alternatives. This person says, I have never attended support group meetings until these Zoom meetings started to pop up with the virus. I like these meetings online and I feel it works better for me than in-person meetings. I'm worried that these will go away after the virus is over. What should I do?
I think that's a really good point. I think there's my sense is that there's been a significant change in perception about remote support for people as a result of the pandemic. So certainly talking about in the UK, during prior to the pandemic, there was quite a lot of resistance to live video delivery of therapy and that sort of thing. It was seen as quite radical. And my sense is, talking to people in the National Health Service over here, that's just completely changed. So there is the trusts local to us are all delivering things by telephone, they're delivering things by Zoom and Skype, and they're not planning to radically alter that, during as we re-engage. I mean, there will be more face-to-face things, but that once people have realized that they can actually deliver support effectively in those ways, I think you can't unknow that. So I think there will be more balance in how people are supported, once this is over. But certainly all the things I'm hearing is suggesting that the support for online services is something which is actually a change in terms of how we're all seeing care, rather than just a temporary fix for this current crisis. I don't know what you think, Victoria.
Yeah, and I know, and I believe this was even sort of the pre-COVID time, that the Depression Bipolar Support Alliance has, it's an American organization, has online support groups. And if you go there, you can find where they are and what time they are. And then also it's linked to a larger website, and I think it's called support people or support center.ca. I can't remember what it is, but if you go to Depression Bipolar or DBSA Alliance, you can find out where those online groups are, and it'll also direct you to that larger one. And then they have actually all multiple topics, so you can find one specifically for substance use, as well as anxiety or bipolar disorder and things like that. So I think that's an ongoing one that even happened before COVID.
That's really helpful. And just to give a UK flavour to that, Bipolar UK have similar sort of well-established e-forums and that sort of thing for supporting people remotely, and those do predate as well. So I think, like you were saying, they're not things that are just being put up hastily and will be withdrawn. They're things that are there for the long term, I think.
And one of the other things too is, I would say, for the groups that you belong to or that you're attending, really give the feedback that you want these to continue, because if there's one person that gives that feedback, people know that there's at least 10 other people that feel the same way. And that's the way people start to innovate. So, yeah.
Great point.
It is reassuring to hear that a lot of these, people are trying new and different things. This situation is forcing us all to be a little bit creative in how we are social, whether that's, contact with friends and family, as well as these kinds of support network meetings. And I would be surprised if that's not continuing in some way afterwards. And at the end of this session, we'll be sharing some links to some online resources for that, where you can find online support groups if you haven't tried one before. We have a question about the impact of the kind of change in routine that isolation has brought and how that's impacting on substance use. This person says, since the pandemic, I'm finding it very hard not to use substances, specifically alcohol. I'm out of work and there is nothing to break up the day. I find that I'm very lonely and stressed, and at least when I have a drink, I feel something different for a while. Now I keep waking up depressed and want to drink more to get out of that. I feel like I'm spiraling out of control. What can I do?
Okay, so that sounds like a tough situation, and I think again it's really to the person's credit that they're identifying the issue in the first place. And I think it sounds like they're highlighting one of the things we were talking about earlier about the sort of short and long-term effects of alcohol. So it probably is the case that the quick hit of alcohol has an immediate or short-term effect that feels quite seductive. And also in the question, they're also identifying that actually that doesn't seem to be helping that much, in the sense that they're then waking up with worse mood and finding it harder to get on with the day. And so, I mean, I think a lot of the things we've been talking about actually actively creating a routine for yourself is hard, but it's really important. And it's important, you know, it's not unique to bipolar, but it can be particularly important to sort of think, okay, well, what are the markers in a day when we're in this different situation? How do we create, you know, positive moments in the day? How do we connect with other people? How do we reach out and get the sort of support we were talking about? And, you know, how do we look after ourselves in constructive ways? And I think, you know, Victoria's description earlier about the positive benefits of that take a little time, but they can grow over time. But Victoria can say that more eloquently than me, so I'll pass over.
No. You said it really well, and I think I can. I've been there really recently, not necessarily trying to stop reducing my substance use, but just trying to create a routine. So I was in this quite severe low, and it was more severe than it had been for many, many years. And the first thing I needed to do was create a routine, which if you're really depressed is really hard to do. So I don't know if this person's connected to any health professionals or anything like that. If you're not, maybe even if you can do it on your own or with a buddy or something like that, even, you know, just texting somebody. But for me, a lot of it was giving myself a window of when I needed to get up. So ideally it would, let's say, be, you know, if 8 o'clock, you know, it wasn't going to be 7 o'clock was too early, 8 o'clock, and maybe between 8 and 9 a.m. was when I was going to get up. And did my best to do that. And then sort of the three things I knew I needed to do was it feels responsible. And then the other important thing was one thing that I remembered that I enjoyed doing. And so it was reading a book. And it was just keeping it really minimal, and the expectation, or I guess making it as easy to be successful at those things as possible, and bringing as much self-compassion, because the hardest part for me was actually getting up in the morning. Once I sort of got up, it was sort of like a pebble rolling down the hill that I sort of, despite myself, wouldn't really go back to bed. You know, I'd go and I'd get my, you know, clothes on, okay, and doing those things, and ideally sort of time blocking them, like when do I want to have those done? I put them in my day timer. I needed to do that, and if it wasn't working, then I tried to sort of figure out, okay, what would make it easier for me to get that, to be that, to accomplish those things. And then somehow, you know, I still may, you know, you may still have a drink within those times, but at least you know you're doing those positive things. And it can do a lot for even just self-esteem. And I find that when I was really depressed and not able to do the things I knew that were good for me, that shame and guilt came up. So when I was able to do one thing that was good, it really did sort of give me a boost and a bit of distance from sort of the negativity that I was feeling.
Thank you for that one. We've got a couple of questions coming in from people who are supporting someone in their life with bipolar disorder. So we have one person asking about marijuana specifically. That the person that they support is a chronic user of marijuana, which is making it a bit difficult for his psychiatrist to correctly medicate his bipolar disorder. Half the time he doesn't know if he is treating the side effects of marijuana use or the mental illness itself. And I think this links into another question that we have, which is any tips for how to communicate with a family member about their substance use?
So, I mean, I think as we were talking about, I guess marijuana use is not uncommon in general and in bipolar. And I think some people who live with bipolar do describe feeling that they feel it helps. But actually, in terms of the research, I think there's a blog on this at the end of the talk, actually, Emma. The research in general seems to be that actually longer term cannabis use isn't that helpful for people with bipolar in general, in terms of greater risks of higher levels of anxiety, possibly higher risks of psychosis and that sort of thing. So it's certainly an important thing to consider as a challenge. And I think obviously it's really helpful if clinicians can engage with this in a constructive way. So I know some people feel that they almost resist talking about that sort of thing with their, say, psychiatrist, if they've got a psychiatrist who has very fixed views. But actually being able to have a sensible conversation with, for instance, a clinician about, well, why are you using it? What are you hoping to get from it? Is that actually what's working? Other things we can sort of brainstorm that might be a bit more constructive, more helpful, the sorts of things that Victoria was describing earlier, can all be sort of part of trying to make a change with that. And I think in relation to the other question, a lot of the evidence in terms of what works with substance use issues in terms of therapy is also relevant in terms of sort of how we engage people generally. So that general motivational interviewing approaches and that sort of thing is about sort of meeting the person where they're at as far as you can. So if somebody is just locked into substance use, just sort of trying to, you know, explain to them why it's not a bad idea or why it is a bad idea and how they would benefit from not doing it, can fall on really stony ground often. But trying to get to what actually the person does value and what they actually want to do with their lives, and trying to see ways and opportunities where that could be facilitated, can actually begin to open doors to having that difficult conversation about one of the things that might be getting in the way, which could be that substance use issue. So sometimes what may feel like a rather indirect approach can actually potentially be more fruitful. I think that those are my initial thoughts.
Yeah, and I feel like it's also really important for the family member to get support for themselves around that, and some clarity of because it's you can't control someone else's behavior as much as you may feel like you know what's best or what you see is detrimental. And so I feel like finding ways so that you can make sure your needs are met and that you have an understanding of how you can talk to somebody about that. And then if those can't be met in that situation, what are your alternatives? What are the options that you have to take care of yourself? What are the boundaries that you need to make? And it may not have anything to do with that person changing their behavior. It may be about you finding ways. And this may not be something that you want to hear. You may want to find, you may want to just know, saying, okay, well, if I just do this, A plus B will equal C. And I think it goes a long way, because I think, as soon as you sort of push someone in a direction that they may not be interested in, it's just going to create more tension. And the biggest thing that I think actually helps is when there's a really loving rapport and an understanding and as much compassion as possible. And that, I think, is probably one of the biggest challenges and stumbling blocks. So that's one of the things too. If the person's living with you and is your adult child or something, to some degree, I think you do have more leverage, because you can make sort of boundaries around, if they're living under your roof, you have certain needs, and these are the things that you need and you want. And if not, then you can find alternatives and support that person, and just encourage the person to know that you're there no matter what, whether they want to sort of abide by what you're asking, or if not, to find other solutions that may not mean living it within and under your roof.
Thank you. I think I might make these the last question so we have enough time to go through our resources and tips at the end. And again, there are two questions which are kind of closely linked about how to manage triggers to use substances, particularly social cues, with the changing routine at this time. So one person says that online happy hour is a really big part of how my social network is connecting right now. And I'm drinking way more than I used to, but I don't want to miss out on whatever social connection I can get during this time. And another person brings up that living at home now with their family, who is aware of their substance use difficulties, but they still like to drink around me sometimes. But I can't expect them to stop drinking completely at home. How can I be reasonable in approaching them? So how can people manage these social cues to use substances at this time?
Thanks, Emma. So those two, as you say, sort of related but interesting challenges in sort of slightly different ways, I guess. So the first person was talking about the sort of social media, the social media meeting with friends on social media, and those friends drinking and feeling sort of impelled to sort of drink with them.
Online happy hours, you see a lot of
yeah. So I think, I mean, again, I think it's really important that they're actually identifying that this is a challenge now, rather than sort of just going along with it. That's a really important first step. I mean, I suppose it's worth also thinking about how many of these are they engaging in. It's very easy to feel that if you don't go to all the social events, people will somehow forget you, or that you'll drop off the list for the invite or whatever. But in my experience, people are generally a bit more tolerant than that. So actually, if some of the social engagement is non-happy hour related, with other groups of friends, maybe it could gradually get a bit easier to balance those two things. I think also, people who are meeting you remotely aren't necessarily going to know how much you're drinking a cocktail and how much you're drinking something else. So, just a bit of interspersing to actually sort of manage your rate of consumption is also helpful. And I think the general suggestions that we've been making through the other questions are actually probably highly relevant to that. So if you have kind of nothing in the day and then the happy hour is the thing, then that's a very different situation from actively putting things into your day that are also positive and helpful. So that's, that may still be a nice thing, but you're not hanging on to that as your one solution to having a decent day. And I realize there's another part to that question, but I wonder if there's anything you want to add, Victoria, now?
No, it probably is for both. I mean, and this is maybe a really trite suggestion or solution, but it's something that I've had to use, because right now I'm choosing not to drink, and people are, people want to have, quarantinis and, or, around a fire or something or whatever. So I've just really, one of my pursuits, and also is finding the best non-alcoholic drink possible. So I've had suggestions of shrubs. I've tried all the different flavored bubbly drinks, and whether it's tonic, or just tonic that has all that stuff. So making it sort of appealing, so that even if it's different enough than just water or juice, and so I don't know if this is part of it. I think is feeling included in the social aspect of it, and that's sort of a separate thing. But the literal physical kind of stuff, because I like the taste of some of the alcoholic beverages that I was having. So finding something that's at least somewhat enjoyable, and as where I don't feel like I'm missing out on at least that level, has helped me actually.
Perhaps we should get Victoria's shrub recipes to share on the social media later.
I haven't gone that direction yet. So at the moment, I'm sort of finding juice cocktails with juice and bubbly water and tonic and all this kind of stuff, and a dash of lime and ginger or something like that. So
Does sound very good.
yeah, and it's refreshing too. And and I think the other question was about
if you live with a family member who's drinking,
but
that's influencing your behavior.
Yeah, and I think what you were saying, Stephen, is really building in those other positive experiences within the day. And I think it's really generous, and also really, take credit for the fact that you recognize that you can't expect people around you not to drink necessarily, or that you're not trying to change that. You're looking at what's in your control, which I think is really, really important. And I think it depends on like when they're drinking, if it makes it possible for you to sort of take a breather from the actual place and be walking around. But in times of quarantine, that may not be possible. And do you have any thoughts about sort of monitoring those triggers when you're actually sort of within sort of a family that's drinking, and you're sort of more vulnerable to
I might just ask if we can keep it 1 minute answer so we can move on to resources.
Yeah, I mean, I echo Victoria's comments, and I think having some sort of journal or diary or simple record of what patterns you're noticing in that environment can be really helpful, so that you can think how you might adjust. Can you withdraw under certain circumstances, as Victoria was suggesting, and also what sort of conversations constructively can you have with the family, because it is your family, about how they can support you in this. You're not asking them to stop drinking, but maybe there are other things that they could do that could help you in terms of the other aspects of the day. So I think thinking creatively as best you can around those issues might be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you so much to both of our speakers. I'm so grateful for you sharing all of your responses to these questions and your expertise on this topic. I might quickly move through additional resources, a couple that we mentioned earlier. So there is a blog about bipolar disorder and cannabis on the Crest.BD website. This is a kind of emerging area of research, as we flagged. So if you're interested, there were a couple of questions that came up about that. Please do pop over to our website to read our update on that, and Laura has dropped the link in the chat. We also have a couple of country-specific resources for our Canadian guests. The Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction is sharing some resources, and I think this is a really important normalising statistic to look at, that it's not just people with bipolar disorder who are struggling with increased substance use in this time. This is something that many people are finding really challenging. So if you're in Canada, the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction is a good one to check out for resources. And then we have some UK specific ones coming up with Mind, various helplines and resources hosted there. And we also flagged that virtual recovery and virtual peer support groups are a really good way to find support in this time. And obviously that's really good, for international listeners. So the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services website has all of these online recovery resources. So if you haven't found a group and you've become interested in that after this talk, please have a look on there and see whether you can find something local to you. The Crest.BD Bipolar Wellness Centre also has some resources about substance use. Bear with us if it's down when you go to check it out. We've been having a bit of technical difficulties with that, but we do host a lot of tools, and the quality of life tool is still up. This is a way for you to kind of quickly take the temperature of how things are going for you, both with your mood and your symptoms, but also broader quality of life areas and your well-being. Our academic website tells you about all of the research and news, the things that we're up to in that space, including our Bipolar Bridges app, which is under development. So if you're interested in contributing to that, we have an online survey up at the moment to ask about how you use apps, or if you're a healthcare provider, what kind of apps you might discuss with clients who have bipolar disorder. Whether you use this kind of technology or not, we're really interested in hearing from you. You can see previous talk BDs and today's session after the event at our website. And the next one that we'll be hosting is with one of the founding members of Crest, Professor Greg Murray, who'll be talking about sleep and bipolar disorder, which is going to be May 13th.
May 13th in Melbourne and May 12th, I think, in the Canada and US and UK.
Thank you. And we'll have all of the local times up on the Talk BD website. And I'll just pass over to Stephen to talk through some Spectrum links.
Yeah, so we just wanted to flag there are some resources on the Spectrum Centre website. You can access news about Spectrum on Facebook and Twitter as well. So some specific resources, we have a toolkit, an online toolkit for relatives of people with psychosis or bipolar. That's freely available on the link that's being provided. So have a look at that and see what you think. We've also got resources, again, free e-resources around personal recovery in bipolar. So have a look at that. That includes a workbook, but also videos and animations around people's experiences of that. So those are some things that people might find useful.
We'd like to give a big thank you to our funders and partners who have contributed to this event, as well as all the research behind the scenes. We're very appreciative of their contributions. And if you'd like to stay up to date with Crest, these are all our social media links. We're also interested in your feedback about this event. So we do have a survey, which you can find on the Talk BD website. And we'll also post the links on the Facebook video, where you can give us feedback about what topics you'd like to see us cover in future. So I want to offer once again a really big thank you to Victoria and Stephen, and to everyone who's attended today. Thank you so much. Until next time, please stay healthy and well.
Yeah, stay safe, stay well.
Stay well. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks for joining.
Bye. Thank you.